Here's an infantry talent tree breakdown. The infantry talent tree is one of the better red trees, and it's not hard to see why. When you look at the talent tree, the most notable thing you're going to see is hold the line. And this is a straight 20% damage reduction on a 10% chance, which means whenever you're being swarmed, this is pretty much up perpetually, whether that's as a rally, a garrison, or a field march. But some other notable parts on the tree are the 6% health here, which is useful when you have to already build through here to get to hold the line. The rage on attacks, and then you can take the additional damage to cavalry. There are some talents here that don't get a lot of use though. Elite soldiers, pretty much you have to complete the tree to get 2.5% attack, defense, and health, which is basically like a bunch of little talents, which is just not worthwhile for a full-size talent. And Snare of Thorns is only a 10% chance to reduce march speed, whereas the support tree gives a guarantee on skill. This is a cavalry tree breakdown. When you look at the cavalry talent tree, the two most important talents you're going to be using are Emblazoned Shield, which reduces skill damage by 12%, and Undying Fury, which gives you 9 rage and attack. These are both super useful, but you'll notice they're on opposite ends of the tree. So a lot of times it ends up being Emblazoned Shield or Undying Rage. Disarm does see some use in the talent trees, but in commanders that have the skill tree, a lot of times players opt for the 10% chance to give an additional 100 rage because it better affects your strength. And as a 1v1 versus AoE commander, having this 100 rage is more useful. Alternatively, too, Rallying Cry does not see a lot of use because that 15% damage during the first 10 seconds is typically the time where you're gaining the least amount of rage because you're only using your first or second skill, so you're not building up those rage boosts yet. This is an Archer talent tree breakdown. The Archer talent tree is probably one of the most varied talent trees. You have a wide variety of options. The most common you're going to pretty much use all the time are Venomous Sting, which gives an 8% skill damage boost to both commanders. Razor Sharp, which gives 9 rage after launching a normal attack, and from what I understand, this is also counterattacks. Some other options, Phoenix Tail Arrows does get used on occasion, but it's more to get to Whistling Arrows than to just stop at Phoenix Tail Arrows. And that's because Whistling Arrows gives you a 10% chance to get what is essentially a 25% damage boost for 2 seconds, which is really useful and is a great option if you want to go for a more high damage build. But oftentimes you'll see people invest into defensive talents on the blue tree instead. Overall, the tree is very solid, and it has a lot of different variety in terms of options. This is a breakdown of the leadership tree. Honestly, there isn't much here that's useful, and most of it's early on. You have a 3% reduced damage with 3 different troop types here, a 3% damage increase with 3 different troop types here, and a 6 rage whenever you're attacked here. Besides that, everything kind of falls to the wayside. Strategic Prowess does have some merit as a 20% defense boost, but it's only for 2 seconds. So it's really the immediate counteraction after a skill use. So it doesn't see a lot of great usage because most of the time the secondary and tertiary trees are just better uses. And pretty much outside of these 3 talents, you won't see a lot of the leadership talent used. And those talent points will rather be invested into the defense tree or the skill tree or the garrison tree or any of the other trees that these commanders have. Here are the best red trees by order. In first place, we have the infantry tree. You have Hold the Line, which is the best talent, I think, in the game, and helps solidify an already great talent tree as the best one in the red trees by a good margin. In second place, we have the cavalry tree. This gives you some skill reduction, some skill boost, a little bit of mobility, a good amount of stats, and it's really easy to justify investing into minus the keystone talent, so it very easily makes its case here. In third place, we have the archer tree. While it's not as good as the infantry or cavalry tree, it does have a lot of good bonuses, a lot of good skill damage bonuses, which helps the actual type of archer, so it does a good job as well. In fourth place, we have the leadership tree. While not as good as the main 3 trees, it does have some merit, some solid uses. So it does have a spot on this list above our last place thing, which is the integration tree, which is just not very good. This is a skill tree breakdown. The skill tree is probably the most used tree in Rise of Kingdoms, and it's not hard to see why. You have so much utility in this tree that it fits pretty much every commander in some way. Whether you want additional skill damage straight up, or additional rage to get more skills off, or rage whenever you use a skill so that you can get a head start, or increase skill damage for your secondary commander here and here. So it's hard to pin down just one skill that most commanders can use, but the most common ones people build to is minimum to rejuvenate and to clarity whenever the skill tree is available. And that's because you also get reduced skill damage taken, you get 3% skill damage boost here, secondary skill damage boost here, and rage on attack here, while also getting all sorts of utility. Latent power does get used a lot with additional skill damage commanders, and then really naked rage is one of the few talents that doesn't get a lot of use. This is the support talent tree breakdown. The support tree does essentially what the versatility tree does for the yellow trees, but the support tree does it very well. You have the defenses tree loose formation, you have the skill trees burning blood and rejuvenate, and you have so much utility here that pretty much every commander can use something on the support tree well. The Keystone tree talent 2, Cage of Thorns, is also super useful outside of garrisons because the reduced march speed, especially when maxed out, helps hold the enemy still while you are attacking them and helps your allies work on them, especially in the field. And you'll see use on that with commanders like Joan Prime in the field, using this to help slow enemies down and stick to them more often. So overall, this is one of the better trees in the game just because there's so much utility that everybody can get a little bit out of it. This is a mobility tree breakdown. The mobility tree is in a weird spot, not because it's bad per se, but because to have the mobility tree means you're missing out on the skill tree, the support tree, or the defense tree. But there's a lot of good utility here. The most common hallmark talent is Hasty Departure, which gives you 60% movement speed for 10 seconds after leaving a structure. This includes farm nodes, flags, anything that you enter and then can leave counts for this speed boost. So it's very useful if you're wanting to do hit and run tactics and move around quickly. Other talents that are on here that are very common are Lightning Charge for the move speed, Saving Cross for the skill damage reduction, Swiftness to increase your speed whenever you're hit by a skill to help escape, and Vortex to help slow down the enemy so that they can't escape when you hit them with skill. But overall, it's a very decent tree. It's just that it's overshadowed by skill tree, defense tree, and support tree, which are all amazing. This is the defense tree breakdown. Of all the blue trees, the defense tree is not the best, but certainly not the worst. You've got 9% reduced skill damage taken, 1.5% reduced damage taken, 9% defense, and 6 rage whenever you're attacked, all within the first 20 talent points of the tree. Once you get outside that first 20 talent points, things become a little more niche, and that's why you'll see reduced investment in it. For example, balance is nice, but you're reducing your own damage dealt, which makes it a little more bad for you against Swarm because you're dealing reduced damage to your Swarmers. Testudo reduces damage taken, but it reduces it for such a short period of time that you don't get a lot of utility out of it. And lastly, Desperate Elegy is useful, but you being below 30% units is not a great position to be in, and that extra 5 rage is not going to do a whole lot to benefit you. Here are the best blue talent trees. First, we have the skill tree. It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. The skill tree is great. It's versatile. You have rage gain, skill damage, a little bit of damage reduction, just a little bit of everything to make itself useful. So the skill tree easily makes itself as the best tree of the best type of trees. Second, we have the support tree. You get an AoE slow, a move speed boost, damage reduction, pretty much everything you could ever ask for. So it makes a very solid case as one of the best trees. In third place, we have the defense tree. While not as great as the skill or support trees, the defense tree does provide some good utility, although it is very much the middling tree. In fourth place, we have the mobility tree. The mobility tree doesn't do a whole lot besides the extra speed boost, which the support tree has. So the only real useful tree that it has talent-wise is already on a different tree. And in last place, we have the attack tree. There just isn't a lot here to get excited about, so there's not much to really invest in. This is a Garrison talent tree breakdown. I covered why most garrison commanders don't invest heavily into the garrison tree. But I kind of want to go over it a little more in detail, talent by talent. The three most common talents you're going to see are Impregnable, which is a 15% skill damage taken reduction. Empty Fortress Stratagem, which is a 6% damage dealt increase. And Impenetrable Fortifications, which reduces all damage taken by 6%. These three are essentially a investment of 14 talent points to give you the equivalent of like a skill and a half to 2 skills worth of utility. So pretty much every garrison should be using this. Alternatively, you can use King's Guard if you don't have a lot of variety in your other talent trees like you would with the leadership and defense trees like YSS and Theo have. But overall, it's a heavy investment that takes some Watchtower attack, which gives you some inefficiencies, so most commanders don't use it. This is a Conquering Tree breakdown. The Conquering Tree, like most yellow trees, does not see a ton of investment. However, there are two major paths that most rally builds take. The first rally build that has Conquering builds to Buckler Shield, and this just gives you a straight 9% counter damage taken reduction for the investment of 7 talent points. This is great when you're in between and you don't really have anything else you could build towards, so it's typically used pretty often for most rally builds. Alternatively, you can build all the way to Entrenched, which takes more talent points, but then gives you a straight 3% damage increase and a 3% damage taken reduction, which is actually more significant than it seems at first. This also gives you access to Moment of Triumph, which gives you, at full rank, a 9% damage dealt boost while above 90% strength, which is typically your first skill or two will then have 9% extra damage, which is a decent boost for what you're getting elsewhere. Here are the best yellow trees. In first place, we have the Garrison tree. It is the most invested in yellow tree in the game, and it's not hard to see why, because the talents here are just so useful that it's hard not to justify investing in them. In second place, we have the Conquering tree. While it's a mile behind the Garrison tree, it does still provide some redeeming qualities and some redeeming skills, so it does earn a place on this list in the top end. And last, we have the Versatility tree. This is easily the worst tree in the game, I would think, just because there's not a lot that really gives you consistency, which is the main thing you need in this game. So it easily falls to the very bottom of the list. Here are the 3 best talents of the game. Whenever I see these, I immediately build them. First is Hold the Line. When you have infantry, this is the best talent in the game. 20% damage reduced whenever on a 10% chance whenever you're attacked means when you're being swarmed, it is pretty much up constantly. That means you're constantly taking 20% less damage, which hurts for the enemy because then you're dealing that much more damage because you have more troops left. Second, we have Impregnable. This is a staple of garrisons. Pretty much every garrison in the game uses this, whether it's a city or a stronghold garrison. And this is because pretty much every rally in the game uses skill damage to deal the primary source of their damage, with the exception of Attila. And this is pretty much just a straight reduction then for their ability to deal damage to you. Lastly, we have Hasty Departure. This is a personal choice of mine, but I find so much utility out of this that I use it whenever I can find it. I use it on Joan Prime, I use it on South. Anybody with the mobility or support tree, I try to use it. Here are my 3 favorite talent trees for garrisons. For the red tree, I actually prefer infantry. Between the health boost here and the straight 20% damage reduction for pure infantry, it's really hard to have a better red tree for defensive positioning and for garrisons. For yellow trees, obviously it has to be Garrison. A 15% skill damage reduction here, a 6% damage reduction here, and a 6% damage boost here further solidifies the solid positioning of the Garrison tree. Lastly, for the blue tree, I prefer the skill tree. There's so much utility in this tree, whether it's the 60 rage on a skill use, increased skill damage for your secondary commander when you use your active skill as a primary, increased secondary damage here, increased rage on attack, reduced skill damage taken. There's just so much utility. And the one commander that really fits this most is Flavius, and it's a perfect example of why he's so good in the meta. But it's also why Jan is good, because he has 2 of these 3 trees. Here's why most garrisons don't invest heavily in the Garrison tree. It really sounds counterintuitive when you say it, doesn't it? But when you look at the Garrison tree, a vast majority of the talents are based on you being a city garrison. That's not very useful to most people in Season of Conquest because you're safe on Alliance territory. So your point is to defend the objective, which is not your city. So really, it doesn't really give you a whole lot of help to invest in it heavily. Whereas if you invest in other trees here, like here and here, you get more utility because they're actually applicable to your commander. There are 3 exceptions to this, and that is impregnable, impenetrable fortifications, and empty forest stratagem, which basically gives you a 6% damage taken reduction, a 15% skill damage taken reduction, and a 6% damage boost. And those are applicable to everywhere.